Good afternoon. We'll get started with this afternoon's presentation about ending the fiscal year, which will primarily focus in Intacct and looking for our open encumbrances that we need to be working on closing. So we're going to have a brief agenda with Workforce Go. We'll talk about posting payroll-related expenses and taking care of your PAs and timesheets if you haven't done that yet. We'll briefly talk about Martis, and then we'll get into Intacct to talk about inventory and encumbrances and how our expenses and encumbrances are accrued. As we go, if you have any questions, please use the chat box in the bottom right corner of your screen. If you have any questions or comments, you include them there and we'll get to them during the presentation. So this fiscal year, our pay period overlaps with two different fiscal years. After tomorrow, when the pay period ends, Thursday, September 30th is the first day of a new pay period, but it's also the last day of the fiscal year. So what this means is we're going to have to post payroll expenses in two different fiscal years. And so typically with 14 potential work days, that means one of those days will get posted to FY21 while the remaining pay will be posted to FY22 on the normal payday. So we'll accrue that one day to September 30th. And so we'll see that reflected on our general ledger and our financial reports once the payroll for the next pay period is processed. We can see that on screen here. Roughly 7% of our payroll will be billed to fiscal year 21, and roughly 93% will be billed to fiscal year 22. So when you look at your financial reports and you see probably a small payroll charge comparatively to your normal payroll charges, this is what you can expect from here. As far as our personnel actions are concerned, make sure if you have funding sources that will be changing, whether it's because you have a grant that has a fiscal year ending, or employees' duties changing with the new fiscal year, whatever the reason, make sure we've done those and we have those circulating and getting approved before the new fiscal year starts. In Workforce Go, whatever cost centers our staff are assigned to, that's where the timesheets default to. So if we currently have the outgoing funding source assigned to our staff, and then we start the new fiscal year with those outgoing ones, once a program monitor updates your employees' cost centers, that's not going to fix any time that would have accrued to the outgoing funding source. It would be the responsibility of the program to make sure that their timesheets are corrected and the funding source is properly reflecting the current cost centers that must be charged. If we don't do that, that's going to cause payroll to be billed to the wrong account numbers or wrong cost centers. And that's going to delay the production of your financial reports. If that's not caught immediately, but further down the line, that may result in us submitting a report to a funding agency and then having to amend it later, which does affect the tribe's reputation as having accurate and reliable information. So we need to make sure we monitor timesheets to ensure the proper funding codes are assigned prior to approving our timesheets. Monitors don't review and approve your timesheets, so that's going to have to be a program responsibility. And then here's just the basic summary of this. Employees coded to get paid from outgoing or old funding sources result in the delay of accurately reported information. This means journal entries will be needed to reclassify that activity. If the original funding source reimburses payroll, this may also have to result in drawdown issues having to be fixed, payments back to the government, other circumstances which can cause further delay for accurate reports. So it's very important we coordinate this stuff with our program monitor, that we work on our PAs, and get this stuff resolved before the fiscal year starts in 2 days. With Martis, the operating year of our budgets are going to change to FY22. So anytime we sign into Martis, starting on Friday, the fiscal year will change to FY22. So if we're looking to make any change requests to a year that isn't FY22, We'll have to be cognizant of that and filter the year to either FY21 or prior fiscal year. If we're unsure of which budgeting year we should be using for our funds, by all means use the Intacct budget comparison report so you can see which base year the funding source has been budgeted. So I have a screenshot from one of our grant programs, and their base year on this one is fiscal year 18. So if this is a current grant that's still being used and spent, the expectation would be that when a budget's being prepared or a change request, the program user is actually going to have to filter to FY18 and make those changes appropriately. There is a video available either on my website, ljstraining.info, or my YouTube page, LJ Moran, that has a video directly about this report. When the year changes, general and direct casino reports will use FY22 for their financial reports or for any new change requests. If they have to make an amendment to the prior year funds, they'll switch to FY21. 638 programs and federal, state, grant and award funds will be using the fiscal year that's the base source of the fund. So functionally, when the contract began is the year we'll use to make our change requests. Revenue funds would use FY22 for any new revenue that they've received, and any posted revenue collected in FY21, they would go back to FY21 to budget that revenue until the carryover is completed by the program monitor once the tribe closes the books on fiscal year 21. So with carryover said, ultimately there's only one revenue type or one funding type that's used where carryovers must be done by a program monitor, and that's the revenue funds. And by carryover, that's closing the fiscal year, calculating how much money can be brought forward into the new year so we can get out of using the prior year and solely be working within a current fiscal year. General, casino, and indirect are budgeted year by year with no carryover. So ultimately, whatever has been approved for their budget for fiscal year 22 is what they would be accessing and working through in MARTIS for any change requests. 638 and federal, state, other programs use the contract period and ultimately the base year when the contract began for budgeting. Their spending period is selected to end whenever the contract ends, which allows the funds to operate for the entire period of time that lasts longer than 1 year. So carryover is typically processed after the closing of the tribe's books, which is normally November 15th, and it depends usually what day of the week that falls on. So I'm sure as the new year's beginning, there will probably be an email or a memo coming out from Myrna or Lynette advising everybody what that day is going to be. So we all have our goal and our deadline to pay any of the existing outstanding bills from FY21. Carryover is processed each year to move a fund from the outgoing fiscal year to the new year. Program monitors are responsible for performing these duties. So if it hasn't been done as a program user, there's nothing you can do to initiate this process. This is a worksheet that they use to calculate. They do journal entries, and when that's all done, they would contact you and let you know. So you can start your initial budget mod to budget the carryover revenue. They use a trial balance report to do this calculation. And for the fiscal year, they'd use 10/1/20 through 9/30/21 to obtain those balances so they can properly calculate what the carryover revenue is. Program users, you do have a responsibility for carryover, and that is close any open purchase orders. Whether that means you're paying the outstanding invoices you've determined must be paid, or closing those that are open and causing an encumbrance against your budget. Outstanding bills must have been submitted for payment. Processing any request payments after the fiscal year has been closed may contribute to a delay in determining carryover and could inadvertently affect the reliability of a carryover balance. And that's a long way basically of saying, if we've closed the books on November 15th, a program monitor calculates your carryover and determines it to be $100. So they move $100 into the new fiscal year for you to budget. And after November 15th, we went to budget and finance, or we sought special approval. We forgot a $50 payment that was supposed to be made in FY21, and that's allowed. You would have been first allowed the $100 to budget that should have been reduced by that $50. So we want to make sure that that deadline of November 15th is met for all our open bills. With 9/30 coming around the corner tomorrow, the only stuff we should be doing at this point for FY21 is closing everything we have open. We shouldn't be opening any new purchase orders because we're probably not going to get the goods by tomorrow. We should be working to close our open POs and start calling our vendors to get those invoices. Carryover cannot be calculated until outstanding activity for the prior year has been resolved. And carryover calculated too soon will result in an incorrect calculation, which affects the fiscal outcome and affect your budget. This is the basic worksheet that the program monitors use. They take your cash into consideration, any outstanding accounts payable, meaning vouchers that haven't been paid that are sitting completely approved but just not paid. Any accrued payroll, such as the payroll that would be posted to 9/30. Travel advances that are sitting out there unresolved. Any money your program has due to other tribal programs. So if we share donations or anything like that that gets split between programs and hasn't been paid out yet, well, we would reduce the cash by that amount, anticipating that you're going to pay that in that fiscal year. So once those calculations are taken into consideration, that's what kicks off the monitor's ability to do a journal entry and increase the fund balance carryover revenue by whatever the calculation is determined to be. And this is based pretty much solely on the actions of a program user. When we've dated our bills and when we've paid them. All right, so now we can get into Intacct. And first, just a brief thing on inventory. If you haven't yet done it, make sure your capitalized equipment, non-capitalized equipment inventory is completed. Work with Santiago in updating that information about what you have on hand. Make, models, items, serial numbers, model numbers, purchase value, the vendor, if they've been transferred or disposed of, the status of that stuff. Work with them to get that so those lists can be updated and reflect the current inventory levels for your programs. But now we'll get into the purpose of today's presentation, which is purchasing. Standard purchase requisitions and contract service requisitions are going to be two of the main things contributing to your encumbrances and why you may have a balance. The two statuses we're concerned with is going to be pending in progress. Pending means waiting for the program user to take action. It wants you to make a payment or close the document, whichever it is that's relevant to the document. And in progress means that the purchase order has been, we've converted the document to a purchase order and it's in draft mode. So that means we need to take action with the purchase order to get the requisition out of in progress. A custom view is an excellent way to monitor this activity. So if we go into Intacct and we go to the purchase requisition workflow, we'll go to purchasing to quote and standard purchase requisition. Typically as users, when we come here, every transaction on this default screen, and we know it's default because the view says all. So this is showing all transactions I have access to. You're going to see everything ever done in the program you can access. So for me, 56,422 purchase requisitions. And if we're looking for those things that are pending or in progress, that could be pretty difficult for us to find. Now we do have the option of using like advanced filters. And so if I wanted to change this view, I want to see a state that equals pending. And a date that is greater or equal to 10/1/2020. And I apply that filter, 56,000 became 107. And so now for me, I've greatly reduced what's on my screen down to the most relevant stuff pending this year. Using this advanced filter button is temporary, so if I left and come back to the screen, I'd have to do it again. So you can always use manage views and create a new view that's permanent like this for you that you can refer to. And this would even allow you to add more information on the screen, like the amount of the transaction, that kind of stuff. So I do have a separate video on my YouTube page that solely just shows you how to do this. But we'll look at that right now. So we go to manage view, create a new view. We get a list of stuff we have available to us to create a list with. So it defaults to saying document number, state, vendor name, date, reference number, converted from, total, vendor document, created by, type, and vendor. If we didn't want things, we can uncheck whatever it is we don't want to include and only have a check mark next to the stuff we want to show. So I've got what I want. We go through this next thing. How do we want the report ordered? From left to right on all of our columns. What's the first column? Do we want it to be the document number, the PR number? And then total, date, however it is. If we want to change it, like we wanted the vendor name, we can just click on the little bubbles and hold and drag. Okay, I want the vendor name to be the second column. And so once we have that ordered the way we want, we can go to our next screen, which is the filters. Basically what we just did on the original view. So we can find the state. And we can say equals pending. And maybe we want to include that date. Anything greater or equal to the beginning of the tribe's fiscal year. If it's a different period of time you want to use, then make it a different date. If I wanted to use the date even further and say less or equal to, and I use 9/30/2021. That means even when I'm in fiscal year 22, I use this view I'm making, it would only include the stuff that fits this filter. Purchase requisitions that are pending between 10/1/20 and 9/30/21. How do we want this to be sorted? We've ordered our columns, but how do we want to see this? Do we want in order by vendor name? Alphabetical, so ascending from A to Z? Or do we want to use something else to make that basis of? So I'm gonna put vendor and then date. So oldest date to newest if we're going ascending. And then finally we can name this. It does need to be a unique name, so if you try to use a name someone used before, you get a message that it's been taken. So use something unique for you that you could use. So I might call it PR pending, use my initials. We don't want to use the deploy option that makes the view available to everyone. And if 150 of us deployed each of our special views, let me save this and we went up here to select, this thing's going to be 150 lines long. We probably don't want that. So here's the view I just created, PR pending. And now we have a total of 70 purchase requisitions between 10/1/20 and 9/30/21 that are in a pending status. Starting with alphabetical order, the first vendor name, which happens to be Coal Pest Control. We can see the dates of those transactions. So like these are pretty recent, probably stuff they're still working on to close or to pay. We know like a purchase requisition here. This has been pending conversion by the program since August. This one has been pending since October 2020. So it's almost been a year since they got approval for it and have never taken the next step to create a purchase order or to make a payment to that vendor with this particular document. But now with this view, we have the ability to make a decision about what we're going to do with this stuff. Likely this thing needs to be closed. So we can convert that to a purchase order and then close that purchase order. All right, any questions on this stuff as I go through? Next ones are purchase orders, contract service purchase orders. These are the 4 different states we need to be concerned with as program users. Pending means it's waiting for the user to take action. So if we see any pending purchase orders, just like we were looking at purchase requisitions, our responsibility is to research why it's pending and then take the next appropriate step. If something is partially converted, that tells us there's a blanket purchase order that has an unconverted quantity balance. Research and take the next appropriate step. Some of us open blanket purchase orders for the full year, so it might not be uncommon to see a purchase order dated for the beginning of a fiscal year still open today, and that's fine. So we might just be waiting to close out September. If it's in progress, that means we've converted the purchase order to a voucher or justification, and we've put the voucher or justification as a draft. So it'd be important we research that voucher or justification and then make a decision what we're going to do with it. And then finally, if the PO is in draft mode, we need to take the next appropriate action. Is it something we need to pay? Then we're going to edit that, convert it to a voucher. Or if it's something we're going to close, we're going to edit it and then convert to a closed partial PO. So we can use the custom views as well. So if I go to purchasing order, purchase order, well, let's make sure we're on the all selection. We'll be given a list of all of those purchase orders. So it's going to be whatever you have access to. Mine is currently 55,000 purchase orders. And so based on this list, if we were looking for in-progress purchase orders, we have 4. There is nothing we can do from the purchase order workflow. There's no convert button. I don't have the ability to edit this purchase order. There's nothing for us to do. That state's in progress because we've sent it to another type of document, and it's that document that needs to be addressed. So if we were to look at this Cherry Todd electric bill, and we go to the history tab, we can see what's been happening with the document since it's been created through now. So we can see when the purchase requisition was created in January. After it was approved, we converted the requisition to a PO. In February, we made one of the payments on the voucher. And then in April, we created a new voucher, but we put it in draft mode. So this is the voucher that needs our attention. And we need to make a decision what we're going to do with that voucher. So we could click right onto the voucher, a new screen's going to pop up. We're ready to go. We have a $206 payment we prepared. We have our attachment, which is hopefully the invoice for it. A program would need to take whatever steps necessary to determine, are we going to pay this? Did we pay it in another fashion? We have this vendor document number, which we could use to research other voucher to see if that's been paid that way. But a valuable report to us that we could use. So I'm going to create a second Intacct tab here. It's a report called Purchasing Transaction Detail. So I'm going to go to the Report Center. And we have this report here, Purchasing Transaction Detail. And if we put in some information, Intacct's going to tell us all about it. So the first thing it wants us to tell us is what period of time do we want to look at. This defaults to the fiscal year to the current date. So 10/1 through 9/29. So if we're looking in 2 days and we want to look backwards, it's going to be for the fiscal year for the FY22. You could just change the as of date to 9/30/21, and boom, we have FY21 loaded, ready to go. We need to tell it the checkbook and program. So we know this is checkbook 59, alcohol treatment. Which funding source was used? This 514-002. That was Cherry Todd. Using the utilities line item. So we're going to add that. And then lastly, what type of purchasing transaction do we want information about? We know this is a voucher, so we want to see if it's been paid in another way. So let's do that. Let's only look at vouchers. And when vouchers are completely approved, its date changes to closed. So we want all closed vouchers using utilities for Cherry Todd for that funding source program checkbook. So we're going to view this. So we have a ton of payments. We're looking for something that's $206.57. So we could scroll through or read each of these. It might be tough to find. If you use Control F on your screen, then Control find. So let's. Okay, 206.57 is not an amount. The total columns right here is not an amount that's been used solely in that voucher. Okay. Well, what about this vendor document number? Well, let's try that on this page. That hasn't been used either. We can actually see at 204688. It stops in February and doesn't go anymore. So whatever that is, if that's an account number, for whatever reason, we discontinued paying it in February, and we know this is for April. So this might be enough information to tell us we haven't made a payment. If we're still not 100% sure, there's one other type of payment we can check on. That's a justification. So we'll change the voucher to justification, rerun the report with everything else the same. Nothing. So in all likeliness, this thing has never been paid. So on the program, if I've done all the research I can to make that determination and it is a bill I need to pay, we can submit this. We may have to justify it if anything has changed, but we need to do something with this voucher, because while it sits in draft, the encumbrance isn't going to clear from this funding source, which would make reporting on this this fund a little bit of a pain. Okay, any questions about looking at this? Looking at the voucher? Well, for those of you who were in the budget training earlier today, we were looking at activity from a funding source. And now we need to look at its encumbrances. So here's from that report, the financial report from this morning. And this thing has $828.32 encumbrance. How are we going to find that? So let's run a financial report. So we might run a fiscal year expense, one funding source view for this one. Program, our checkbook, our funding source. And we'll let this run. So for the general program user, we're looking at a financial report. We're going to see that encumbrance balance. How are we going to find out what's encumbered? We could use that purchasing custom view that we were just looking at a few minutes ago, looking for pending stuff or in progress, partially converted, those types of things. We can run our financial report here on screen. Anything with a blue hyperlink we can click on and get taken to the general ledger report. I don't know about you, but this would be pretty impossible for me to find out what this $828.32 could be looking at this. And so that could be frustrating. So what transactions could be contributing to this? And this takes us right back to that purchasing transaction detail, which ultimately is like the best report we can be using to research stuff like this. We use the financial report to tell us what has a balance. We use this report to see why. So purchasing transaction detail, fiscal year through today, our program, our checkbook, our funding source. We don't know the vendor, so we're not going to put one in because we want to be open to any vendor that could be contributing to this. That's the line item that has the encumbrance. And if we go back to this part here, we know that we can potentially be looking for declined vouchers or justifications, pending partially converted in progress draft POs, or pending or in progress purchase recs, contract recs. So let's go back to our report. We're not going to include a purchasing type. We can only pick one. But you know what? We're going to try to pull purchase requisitions, purchase orders, vouchers, and justifications all into this one. But we can certainly pick more than one document status or state. We know that decline's a possibility. Pending is a possibility. Partially converted. We could add draft to this if we wanted to, or the in progress. For now, let's just try these three. See if we have any luck. Okay, so we get, I don't know, about 10 transactions. So we can see a PO that's pending. So we know this thing hasn't been paid. We haven't taken any action to pay it or close it. We have a handful of purchase requisitions that we've opened. So here they are with those 4 pending purchase requisitions. We know as longtime Intacct users, anything approved for a purchase requisition means the encumbrance has been created. So these 4 things are definitely contributing to that balance. Declined purchase requisitions. No effect on our general ledger, so we're not going to worry about those two. And then finally, 2 declined vouchers. They haven't been paid, so definitely affecting our encumbrances. That balance that's given us, though, is $1,033. Our encumbrance balance over here is $828. So let's take out the old trusty computer calculator here. We have $133.77. And those 2 declined purchase requisitions, one is $62.65. One is $142.80. Voila, there's our balances. We have document numbers, all of those things affecting the encumbrances on this report. So we know what we need to do with the vouchers. Are they things that still need to be paid? And we better go look to see why they're declined, make that correction and resubmit. These purchase requisitions we opened in June and April. For some reason seems doubtful that we might have used those if we never took the next step to actually create purchase orders. But we're still going to do our research. Did we do business with those vendors? Let's get rid of this report here. So we know this is all Lakota country times. So do we have any unpaid invoices that we need to address? And then a pending PO in June to Rosebud Rental to fix light poles. Fiscal year ends tomorrow, so the people responsible for this can duplicate this report and hammer this out and then take whatever action they need to make sure this $828 encumbrance gets turned to $0. Okay, any questions again for purchasing transaction details? If you have them, please put them in the chat box. Now, this purchasing states that we're talking about with pending and all that stuff from the presentation. On the YouTube page, there's 2 different videos that only focus on purchasing states. If you're not sure what they could be or what they are, watch those videos. Or you can come to Intacct, go to Help and Support, Help Center, search purchasing state, it comes up, purchasing transaction states, and there we are. The list of what each one means. There's plenty of resources out there for us to be able to do this, whether it's watching a video, reading what Intacct has to tell you, and understanding that. And of course, looking at the history of these documents, we can definitely see the journey of what's happening with our stuff and get a good understanding. When it says converted, we can see on this page here that it's become a new document, the purchase order. All right. Well, no questions coming in. We just want to make sure as we're closing this stuff, we don't want to be rushing. It's going to lead us to mistakes, especially now that we're going to switch years. And we're going to have to be mindful of what date we're using when we pay our bills. On Friday, October 1st, when we start paying anything from FY21, we want to make sure we change our date to actually reflect FY21, so 9/30/21. If we're in here and we're going to pay a bill, so let's find something pending from 2017. If I was going to pay that voucher, it doesn't matter that that thing was dated 2017. The date defaults to today. So just be cognizant of the date we're using. And if you're unsure, reach out to your monitor about what period of time you're going to use. If you're unsure what those dates mean, reach out to the monitor, send me an email. But we certainly want to make sure of that stuff before we do them instead of afterwards. Frequently view your financial report, especially after we take action. If we close a purchase order, your next step should be bringing up the financial report to see what happened because you closed the purchase order. Did the encumbrance clear like you expected it to? And the sooner we see any issues with that kind of stuff, the sooner you communicate them to the monitor, hey, the faster we can fix it before something really bad happens, like reporting the wrong amount to a funding agency. All right, since we have no questions coming in, thank you everybody for your time. Enjoy the rest of the day.